welcome to episode 13 of the Birdhouse. Man, it feels good to be back. Hey, and this week is special. We've got some fantastic guests. We're going to talk about the sustainable path to a $2 trillion plus carbon credit for RWAs with Carbon Hood, Red Belly Network, and Bluebird. So can't wait to get to our guests, get to our panel, have a regular conversation like we always do. But before we do that, I'm going to play one more song. I just ask you guys if you could drop down to that little purple pill. We want to fill this room out as much as possible, get the information out. Just drop a like, a comment, or retweet, whatever you feel comfortable with. And we'll be back with you guys in just a minute. Guys, hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Birdhouse. We're back with Bluebird, and we've got a fantastic show for you today. We're going to talk about the sustainable path to a $2 trillion plus carbon credit RWA tokenization with Carbon Hood, Red Belly Network, and of course, Bluebird. We've got people coming in from all over the world. We have folks in Sydney, Australia, New York, out on the west coast of the United States, over in Munich, Germany. Like, this is banged out. So thank you guys for being here early. I apologize for my Telegram notifications. I'll take care of that in just 1 second. I don't know how they're getting through, but they seem to be. So, but let's just get right into it. Today on the panel, we've got, our co-hosts, both from carbonhood.com and Red Belly Network. Of course, we've got Bluebird. From Carbon Hood, we've got Yanni Wolf, the CEO. From Red Belly, we're joined by Tim Bass. He's the Director, Chief Growth Officer of Red Belly Network. And then from the Bluebird team, we've got Corey Billington, the founder and CEO, and Ian, our Chief Marketing Officer. So I just want to welcome you guys all to the space. I guess I'd say good morning, good evening. Appreciate you guys being here, and really excited to jump into this space and just kind of talk about what you guys are doing. We try to keep it conversational here, so there's a lot to get through, but also the partnership with Bluebird. And so just without further ado, I'll just kind of run through. I want to bring Tim up first. Tim, how you doing today? Tell us a little bit about your role at Red Belly and what the mission and vision is for Red Belly Network.
Yeah, definitely. Good to be back. Always enjoy having a chat with you guys. So yes, you're right. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Red Belly Network. So for those who don't know, Red Belly is a layer one blockchain, but we're quite different to pretty much everyone else out there. So from the beginning, Red Belly was born out of academia. So the underlying consensus was invented in the University of Sydney in CSIRO. And it's actually achieved formal verification, which means that the network is guaranteed to be correct regardless of network size. And this has been mathematically proven. And so this is giving you a guarantee around deterministic finality that you cannot get on any other blockchain. And this doesn't really matter at this stage of crypto for most chains because they just replay the transaction, and if there's a branch, the network just sort of catches up. But in real world assets, it matters a lot. And if you can imagine, and you're getting a taste for this with the carbon hood assets we'll talk about today, but you can't have billions and potentially trillions of dollars of assets being replayed because the network couldn't catch up or had dropped a transaction or there was some sort of split consensus. So Red Belly is a collaborative network. So the more nodes that we add to the network, the more performant it becomes. So it's extremely fast, extremely secure. And from that perspective, it's a great technology to run real world assets on by default. And so what we've done on top of that is build a couple of interesting go-to-market tools. So the first one is verifiable credentials. So the idea is that when you join the Red Belly network, you do an off-chain identity check. So at the moment it's passport, but we're about to also roll out national IDs and driver's licenses. This is both on testnet and mainnet. And so when you join this network and verify yourself, you then generate what's called a verifiable credential. And this is done using zero knowledge proofs. And this allows you to have reusable KYC. So if you think about all the assets, all the asset issuers, all the dApps that run on Red Belly, you can programmatically check at point of sale if you're eligible based on your licensing or criteria. So if you're a sophisticated investor and you're trying to do business with a particular asset, they don't have to manually re-KYC you. And so this is a factor of order of magnitude, really, in terms of efficiency. And this really kind of takes all of the, I guess, KYC obligations that these walled gardens continue to create over and over again on other networks and factors it out at the network layer. So it's really fast, and you basically have a client-side credential for all of the eligibility criterias that you as a person have achieved. So if you've got a degree, if you're over 18, if you've got a driver's license, this is all a credential, right? Now, up from that, you then have, because everybody has verified, this accountability layer, which means that the asset issuers, who are the people with these huge amount of assets and they're licensed and regulated, can comply with these licenses and regulations. Because people thinking in crypto that KYC is something that the project or the network is imposing on people because they want to. It's actually a very well understood rule and law in, particularly in the US, but many other advanced economies. So the obligation of KYC is actually on the asset issuer. So if they can't meet that obligation, then they can't issue and offer these assets, even in TradFi, let alone crypto. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. So now we've got a fast blockchain, it's collaborative, it's deterministic, we've got KYC, verifiable credentials built in, and then we've got this sort of compliance check done at the network level. So then the asset issuer can deploy a whole bunch of amazing assets, and this is where it gets fun. So where it gets fun is we can then start to compose all of these different tokenized assets directly on the network to create new structured products. And so you're starting to see real world assets get excited about treasury bills, but these are just copies of instruments that already exist off chain. So we can start to issue them natively on chain. We can start to compose, a product that has carbon in it, it has debt, it has a yield, it has a commodity, and you can have basically bespoke products based on your taste and your financial risk appetite. So this is where Red Belly is really going to take it and run with it. And this is why Carbon Hood's such an amazing project, because they're really sort of on the forefront of kind of embracing this approach. And I'll let Yanni and the team talk about it today. But yeah, really happy to be here. We've been running our testnet for about 5 months. Mainnet is very close, even though I haven't announced it publicly yet, but I'm feeling good about that too. Maybe I'll even drop some more alpha as we go. So yeah, good to be here. Thanks, guys.
Awesome, Tim. Dude, so much to think about just even in the brief intro. I can't believe it. This space, guys, suit up and pack a lunch. We are onto something here. Tim, you just mentioned Carbon Hood. We're very grateful to have Yanni, their CEO, with us. Yanni, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself, and how you got into the sector, and then maybe just a quick 90 seconds on the origin of Carbon Hood and kind of what the mission is, and then we'll open it up to the panel and welcome the rest of the guys and get right into the meat of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Yanni from Carbon Hood here. Just, I suppose, my background's come from a finance sort of industry, startups, been doing startups for the last 20 years across all different sectors. Went through some, I suppose, personal health issues over the last number of years, and about 4 years, and came out of that thinking I need to change a few things. I want to work in a sector which sort of restores a lot of things and aligns with something that I do. My partners over in America were working on some pretty major projects in the carbon credit sort of space, bonding a couple 100 million tons of assets. And lo and behold, an opportunity came along where they needed to leverage and work out how to take Carbon Hood from a niche working with major corporations, working in closed sort of loop systems to spread it to the rest of the world. And an opportunity arose where we could look at how do we tokenize a lot of assets and bring it to the masses and overcome some really key issues, which were, I suppose, the greenwashing double spends that no one had addressed. And that led me down the path of Red Belly meeting Tim and unpacking the whole project into creating an on-chain registry and moving Carbon Hood to a totally different space in a very short space of time.
Unbelievable. Well, glad that you're here. Glad that you got connected with Tim, and glad that the Bluebird team has started this partnership with you. Just want to introduce Corey and Ian as well. I know most of our audience knows them, but it looks like you guys brought some friends too. So, Corey, why don't you just give us a little bit about yourself and kind of what Bluebird does, and then I'm sure we're going to talk more about the partnership a little later in the discussion.
No worries. Well, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Loud and clear.
If not, please shout out.
No, I got you.
Perfect. Not rug today then. Fantastic. Alrighty. So quickly about me. So I've been in the Web3 space since early 2017. I've helped launch around 100 projects to date. I've sat on around 40 advisory boards, currently still on around 7. During that time, I've deployed a couple of my own companies as well, one of which was in early 2017 as well, which was a marketing company. And then about 4 years ago was our venture capital, which is Andromeda Capital. In the investing space, we've deployed capital into well over 300 projects during that time as well. So we've been extremely active on that front. And it was because of working with projects on both sides of the coin, so to speak, closely with founders and then on the investor side. It really allowed me to see with a lot of clarity all of the issues that are plaguing both sides. And that's where the idea of Bluebird kind of came about in its initial inception. And we decided to start solving those issues. So, about three and a bit years later, we've deployed some software now in closed beta testing. For the founders side, we've also expanded our roadmap and gone out into the real world asset tokenization space as of about a year ago. And that has since been fast-tracked due to working with the Carbon Hood team, which I'm really absolutely grateful for because it's been an amazing experience working with Yanni and the team. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're headed. And there's a few other avenues to our software, but I'm sure as our regulars know, it can take a good 45 minutes to unpack the entirety of Bluebird. So I won't go there just yet. But I think as far as high level goes, that should be pretty decent.
I love it. Thank you so much. Can't wait to get into this discussion. But before we do, let's just hear from Ian, Chief Marketing Officer at Bluebird. Ian, how you doing today? Just why don't you give us a little bit of your background too, just so everyone's caught up.
Well, it's good to be here, but I'm going to not go too much into my background because, to be honest, there's so much interactive discussion we need from everyone involved here. Um, I've been in marketing and technology for a long time, all kinds of emerging technology um, across different spaces, across decades. And I've really not been as excited as I've been since collaborating with the Bluebird team and amazing partners like Red Belly Network and Carbon Hood. And I think, the excitement of this is just like technology, things like carbon credits, sustainability, net zero, it needs to go beyond the dynamics of supply and demand. It's about opportunities and challenges that really touch humanity and the planet. And we all have to work together to further these things. So that's why this space is so important, because we're going to help everyone understand how we do that and how other people can do it as well.
Ian, thank you so much, man. You always have a gift for helping us understand the perspective and the why we're here. I think we all love decentralization and blockchain for that transparency. Just a quick about me. My name's Mike. I am pretty much just the guy behind the mic. I help run the Birdhouse for Bluebird and also do a little BD. And RWAs, at least on the product side, has been a passion and part of my career for the last 15 years, working with branded goods like footwear and apparel, but really excited to get into the tokenization of carbon credits because I think this is a really interesting use case and a great first example of how something like this should go. So, without further ado, let's just get right into the discussion. Ian, you just kind of started to touch on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear from everyone else. Kind of, and maybe we'll go straight to Yanni on this one. The explanation, like what's the benefit and the reasoning behind tokenizing carbon credits?
Well, one carbon credit is 1 ton of emissions or offset of emissions. So in reality, how the easiest way that we thought of what to do is tokenize it. 1 token equals 1 ton, and that's pretty much it. It's a really simple solution, but in the scheme of things, when we're looking at a commodity, a new commodity to the market, how do we bring it across to all sectors? And the tokenization of it to trade, to buy, sell, and retire, it's the only solution I've seen which is commercial enough to work globally and to work globally in different markets at the same time without the double spends, without the greenwashing. It's been paved by the bitcoins of the world to bring in the real world assets of where Carbon Hood's going, but all where most of the real world assets are leading to, I believe.
That's awesome. I love that explanation, and it's so simple when you put it like that. It seems like a big concept. You said that you decided that this was an important space to be in to protect against the double spend, and mentioned getting to know Tim at Red Belly. Tim, give us a little bit about how putting these assets on the blockchain kind of helps solve that problem.
Yeah, so you need a lot of very capable people around you, is the truth. And this is why this partnership between the three organizations is so important. So Red Belly's doing a lot, but if you boil it down, Red Belly's essentially selling compliant block space, right? And so we were very deliberate early on not to be the sort of answer to every single problem, i.e., not trying to be a blockchain and a tokenization platform and a regulator and a market maker and a licensed operator. So we felt that if we could deal with the identity and accountability stack, like I mentioned earlier, the verifiable credentials, then we would give the sort of real world asset toolkit to our platform partners like Bluebird and the issuers like Carbon Hood to compose their products in whatever way they need to. And so we really my team's job and me specifically gets to enjoy matchmaking the best platforms to the best asset issuers. And that's not to say that asset issuers don't often build their own technology, but everybody on the call has probably realized there's a lot of good platforms out there with very few assets and very few users and not a lot of traction on chain. And that's down to a lot of reasons. Obviously Web3 is difficult to understand for a lot of traditional TradFi people, but also without the identity layer being handled, there isn't a boardroom in the world that will issue real volume on chain without knowing who's interacting with it. So for us, solving some of that upfront was important, but then having partners that can actually understand the business model, understand how value moves through the value chain. And this is something Corey and the Blubird team have done very well. You've obviously heard his experience. So when I'm introducing people like this, we want to make sure that we understand how the current asset issuer does business. Carbon Hood's been in business for a long time. They're doing billions of dollars a year of revenue, and we need to be backwards compatible with that. So whatever gets built needs to make sure that we do it in a new way, and we've got distribution, and that's all exciting. But we need to make sure that everybody else can still do what they do. And I think it might have been Yanni that said it, but for us, the core thing here is the registry, right? And I want to spend some time on this. So in every other business model I've seen in real world assets, the registry, i.e. who owns what when, is still stored in a database off chain. And this is okay for now, but when you take a asset that's already off chain and you tokenize it, you're just introducing a bunch of cost to that asset. So when you buy the treasury bill that's on chain, it's going to be slightly inferior in terms of yield because there's a cost to serve and a margin that needs to be captured on the way through. Now, this is a problem because if you're putting a huge amount of assets, not just a treasury bill, but quite expensive assets to move around, like commodities, then people will just go direct to get the asset. They won't do it on a blockchain. They'll just go direct to the distributor off chain, and that kind of defeats the purpose of tokenizing it. So what we need to do is factor out a bunch of those overheads, and that means moving the registry, i.e. the origination point, off a database onto the network. And so this is what Carbon Hoods had the vision to do. So the actual carbon credits that and this first project's one of many coming, is actually the single source of truth globally now for that asset type and for that project. So, I was having a chat to Chainlink recently, and we were talking about price feeds, and they're in the business of bringing a price feed off chain, on chain, and occasionally on chain, off chain. But in these RWA assets that we're now dealing with, because they originate on chain, everybody else, including the walled gardens and TradFi, will now be looking at the Carbon Hood registry for the single source of truth of who owns what when. And this includes price discovery and spot markets. So as you can see, that's a huge step ahead of what everyone else is doing in terms of approach. So we've got a vision for how we think we're going to significantly improve adoption. But we need partners like Blubird and brave asset issuers like Carbon Hood to go, what, it's time to spin these assets out into the world. So I've said a lot there, but I think it takes all of these people to make this work. And ultimately, this is why we've been so successful so early, because we've got some really sort of innovative challenger brands that are prepared to really jump ahead and do something different.
Just to kind of add on to what you've just said there, Tim, learning a lot about Carbon Hood and the carbon industry over the past, gosh, it feels like a good while now, but it's probably only been about 6 or 7 months, is that the inherent manual nature to the way that the carbon credit space operates at this point. Up until what we're doing, of course. And that is what's leading to a lot of the issues where things are being double spent, maybe not always in a malicious way, but sometimes purely because the Web2 database just wasn't updated quick enough and someone has sold an asset that they thought was available, but is in actual fact already spoken for. And it can take, which is shockingly enough, the registries can take up to over a month to actually update with sales data. So that is inherently dangerous, as you can all imagine. So that's just one of the kind of really clunky areas that stood out to me, particularly when learning about how these assets flow, in the more traditional sector. And another thing is that what really shocked me was that the fact that carbon credits are a fairly new asset class. They're not like, commodities and things like that of like wheat and precious metals. However, the processes surrounding them to govern them are really antiquated, which is quite surprising to me as well, because I always assumed that, it's a fairly new asset class. I figured that I'd have some modern processes in place, but it's quite the opposite. It's actually, in my opinion, worse than a lot of our legacy assets that have been around since the dawn of time. So very interesting on that fact. I don't know if anyone else wants to add on to that. Yanni, if you wanted to touch on that as well, it's up to you. But I just thought that was a fascinating piece to me and really stood out to me as well.
So the only thing I can compare it to is in Australia back, when was it, 2024, I helped bring a product to market, which was an organic supermarket. And we ended up having 17 stores, but there was 4 or 5 different certifiers or different people involved saying that they were the be-all, end-all of the certifications for organics. Carbon credits is very similar to that. So we've got 15, 18 registries now, which are all claiming that their assets or their credits are the credit to follow, when in fact there's one source of truth, which is, I suppose, the British standards back in 2011, which everyone's adopted methodologies from. So rather than having all these people competing to say that their methodology is the best, it needs to align with these guys have brought scientific data and proved out a process. And then now we can put it into a registry and commercialize it in a streamlined way that we can actually get the data and the source of truth and sell it on chain with a visibility and transparency that no one else has been able to achieve to date. And that's sort of where I think the alignment will come now, because it's been left to, I suppose, scientists and universities to come up with how they interpret the emission standards.
Yeah, 100%. And look, this is the thing that I'm sure Corey can talk about, but even getting these assets off the registries is a funny story. We were deploying the first $25 billion of assets on testnet, and there was another batch from, I believe it was another registry, but it was all in Spanish. And so Corey's team had to learn Spanish. No, I'm joking. They had to obviously stop for a moment and go and get some English documents. But this is kind of how it works, right? And obviously, this project being in Brazil, obviously it's Portuguese, but a lot of these very rich carbon assets are in non-English speaking jurisdictions, and so to kind of to create a uniform platform that sort of deals with that, at least initially, is quite difficult. Maybe jump in, Corey, and tell us about that story.
Well, mate, I must say, I think when I read these documents, I can actually pick up a bit of what the words actually mean now. So I might have learnt a bit of Portuguese in passing, to be honest. But yeah, look, largely a lot of those, because they're verified in the country as well, that they reside in, a lot of the documentation for these verification, standards and such that have followed, they're produced in the native language because they've got to be largely consumed in those countries, because generally before all of this, the credits were almost, you could say, domiciled in that country to be sold in that country. It was very hard to sell them outside that country because, well, again, unless you know all of these assets and all about them, it's going to be very difficult. You don't know what you're looking at. Whereas what we're trying to aim to do is standardize, not just from a language barrier perspective, but also from a asset, class side of things as well, and really bring everything into a more uniform structure across the board. But look, it was an adventure, definitely putting some of those assets on chain that were not inherently in English. The Google Translator was definitely a good helping hand on that project, that's for sure. Very interesting.
Corey, I'm really glad you brought up that point about the the standards and how it's regulated right now, because I think that adds a lot of context to this conversation. And as we know in the blockchain space, with transparency and information readily available to anyone in consensus proof, then you don't need as much regulation, right? And so we can kind of bypass that. So it's really interesting to bring this to the forefront and sort of take advantage of the technology and what we know it can do, instead of having others, when it's stuck on the registry and in a repository, where they do need that, because now the blockchain and the work that you guys are doing has created this universal language that anybody who can understand the smart contract and view the asset would understand, no matter what language they spoke. So that's really cool. I'm glad you brought that up and created this side discussion. I just want to ask you, while you're kind of on a roll, what's the strategic role of Blubird then in supporting the initiative and kind of expanding the tokenized assets?
Yeah, definitely. So we are, I suppose, the technology stack for the asset management and minting side of things. So, we've built out I suppose, the registry that is the Web2 side of the registry, at least. Whereas, the Web3 side obviously resides on chain. But we, I suppose, are that interface that allows for the data to be pushed on chain. We also have, which might not have been talked about too much, and that is a marketplace that we're built to run alongside this as well. So at its current, build stage and its current iteration, it is an invite-only marketplace designed to serve Carbon Hood's existing client base. But there will be a V2 marketplace that will be opened up to the general public, and this is not going to have only carbon assets on it. It will have like a multi-class asset suite listed there. So you'll have other sorts of commodities, you'll have equity, you'll have other tokenized assets and things like that listed there for a more of a traditional marketplace interaction that has the ability for the purchaser to then relist what they've just purchased at a price that they deem fit for that asset. However, the current marketplace is very much designed to serve Carbon Hood's clients. So it's not there for them to then purchase and resell. It's mainly, for lack of a better term, more of an OTC desk to allow for them to then conduct the transactions on chain. It is the marketplace currently is a fiat first marketplace, which I'm sure some of you will cringe at. But the fact is that when you're dealing with companies that spend in and around 500 million to $1 billion per transaction, like, let's be real, they're not going to be doing it in stable coins, at least not yet. It doesn't make sense for them to do it that way. The current financial rails are perfectly adequate to handle large transactions of that nature, with the current checks and balances that are in place for those international bank transfers. I think once we start to mature a bit more in the Web3 space, where there's a little bit more of a safety net for these large organizations, when they do these transfers, they might start to shift over it. But currently their policies are a little bit in the dark ages. So we have to wait for those policies to catch up before we can shift them over to a more native Web3 experience. That being said, I think that sort of outlines, I suppose, where we sit in that in that sort of area there, and then to expand upon it, like I mentioned or touched on earlier. So we've fast-tracked our asset tokenization or real-world asset tokenization suite for the Carbon Hood team, because we're not just stopping at carbon credits. There is a plethora of assets that we are in the process of mapping, so we're able to start tokenizing other sorts of high value assets that are not necessarily jewelry, handbags, or cars, but more so big industry assets, such as oil, I know everyone mentions gold, but it's not a huge focus on us, but it's more so we would be going to the source, to the mines, talking about futures contracts, things like that with mines for exploration and helping to fund those expeditions as well. So there's a huge, I suppose, asset pool for us to draw from. And I don't think people can quite grasp yet in Web3 just how many trillions are just open for the taking to be tokenized at this point, because more and more firms like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and all the rest of them, even BlackRock, they're all coming into the space. Some are trying to build out their own solutions. Others realize there's no point. It's better to just partner. They can get to market quicker. So that's where we aim to sit, is in that it's there's no point. Let's just partner, and we're going to make it easy for a lot of these companies to come on board and issue their assets on chain.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant, and I totally get it. I think having them, use more of a universal solution that's already built. That is that invisible layer we talk about so much. It's necessary for onboarding. So it's great to be positioned there. Tim, we kind of, sticking on the same topic, we kind of understand how you and Carbon Hood got together, but just love to get a little feedback on you on how, the strategic role that Blubird plays from Red Belly's perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Well, crypto is a big, scary place, and I really like Aussies. No, I'm joking. No, so what happened was I'll give you the longest story. So my previous business was a venture studio out of Sydney called Block 8, and we built and incubated a bunch of early stage projects. So we came across, a lot of great people in Australia and invested in a bunch of great projects. And so quite a few people were aware of the Block 8 team, as it kind of was previous to Red Belly. Obviously, we're one of the parties that put together the joint venture. And so we came across an investor from Queen Vision, who a great team over there, and they do some really good analysis and market reporting. And we were talking about sort of our vision and where we're going. This is just before we launched testnet. And they said, "Oh, you definitely need to speak to Corey and Blubird," and the rest is history, to be honest. So when we first started speaking to them, we're working on some other things around token management and vesting contracts for our investors. And so we're already well down a path with the Carbon Hood team, and like I said, matchmaking is the best part of the job. And so we were looking for a partner who could effectively meet the opportunity. So the thing is with these token investing platforms, if you sort of pair them right back and boil them down, they're basically a registry. Who owns what when? Simple as that. So we had the conversation around, well, okay, we're already tracking tokens of various types and various projects. What if we were to sort of use this kind of skeleton to track other things like commodities, or particularly carbon in this case? And that's where we sort of went down. So we built. I don't want to steal too much thunder. We built some really cool stuff, as Corey was saying, and then we've been on a path ever since. But yeah, the Blubird team is very important to our ecosystem. They're agile, they're reliable, they're fast, they build good stuff. And so from my perspective, that just makes my life significantly easier, because I can introduce licensed and regulated partners like Carbon Hood to a partner, knowing that they're going to get a professional experience. The cameras are even on, which is funny in itself. So yeah, definitely a big fan of the Blubird team, and they're an important part of our ecosystem.
That's awesome, and I love getting that perspective from you and from Red Belly. Yanni, I'm going to come to you with a little bit of a question about Carbon Hood and the possibilities in the future. But as I do that, I just if you want to jump in on the strategic role of Blubird as well, you can tap there, and then I'll follow up with my question.
No, definitely. Bluebird's been the only way that I've seen possible for us to get to market in the speed that we have and offer a solution and come to the table. So when we first made our sort of round of discussions with Tim, we had a very simple MVP to basically tokenize said assets and put them on chain. And within the same time frame, Blubird delivered a marketplace, tokenized the assets, and made a transaction all on chain within probably a matter of 2.5 months. So anyone in the market, I haven't, I've obviously, I didn't go around to too many because there weren't many options out there. But with Tim's help and Corey, we put together a really first-class solution in a really short space of time, and now we're working on version 2, which will open up to the next stages that we have to go. But no, it's been pivotal to actually get to market in the time frame that we had, and Blubird had a solution which they've been working on for years that sort of fitted really well into what we were planning to do.
That's great. And I'm sure that in this industry, as I'm getting familiar with it just through this conversation, there are a lot of traditional players and they're used to doing things their way when they negotiate or exchange. But it sounds like that V2 and will potentially allow new entrants as we've seen other industries in the blockchain industry. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more if it's not hush. But I just want to follow up with you then. Looking more at just Carbon Hood in general, what will a shift like this do, like including possibilities in insurance, how it affects other sectors? Get your viewpoint first and then hear from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, so I suppose pivotally we needed an asset which we could leverage and create global liquidity. So putting something on chain created a solution that we could get assets liquid quicker. What that opened up to were regulators saying, hey, we can actually have a product and know that it is the single source of truth. So yes, you are able to leverage it. So now we are, I suppose, very close to insuring assets with carbon credits, which will change the game to another level. And it's just like having a tax bond or another commodity out there, which is a form of money and can be made liquid. We just needed to create more liquidity globally, and the tokenization of carbon credits was, I suppose, the best solution in the market to date.
That's awesome. I'm blown away by all of this. I'm trying to take it all in and learn from you guys at the same time. Corey, I want to toss it back to you. Just any possibilities that you see and what Blubird anticipates as well that they can guide Carbon Hood on.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there's a lot of things in the works behind the scenes, as you can imagine. Like it doesn't just stop at the carbon credits side of things. So some things that I can, allude to, like Yanni's just kind of mentioned in passing, there is the carbon credits, because you mentioned it there, Yanni, but I'm not sure people might have quite grasped what you just said there, and that's the fact that carbon credits being approved for use as regulatory capital. Now, that when that is finalized, that allows, like, that's essentially saying that they're as good as money, cash money. So you can only imagine the use cases that will allow not only Carbon Hood to achieve, but other industries as well, such as like what Yanni mentioned on the insurance side. So I don't know, Yanni, if you wanted to kind of go a bit deeper onto that. If you don't want to, it's all good. We can leave it for another space. But if you wanted to, by all means, you can go a little bit deeper if you see fit.
Yeah, no, you can't ask me twice on that, Corey, because it's not. Yeah. But okay, so basically a carbon credit. I'll pull it back to what a carbon credit is and why it is important for regulators, governments, and everyone to really adopt a vehicle like this. A carbon credit is a representation of a project or something around the world, it could be planting a tree, it could be growing crops, it could be planting kelp in the ocean, and 1 ton of emissions, probably, a portion of a hectare or carbon locked away in concrete, or even other projects. So it's combating climate change in essence. So where that's really can be created into liquid is globally. There's carbon credits came around from, I suppose, a global sort of tax. Not all countries are taxing, but all countries have a form of fines that are being issued to certain levels of businesses and or taxes. So the carbon credits are the offsets to those taxes and fines that are being implemented across the world now. And this is where the, I suppose, big opportunity is for everyone. So it affects everyone from the household, where every litre of petrol in America has 15% carbon tax built into it. So imagine if people could take a token or take an asset and get a discount on food, or get a discount on petrol, or get a discount on something because of their input of reducing their own carbon footprint at home, all the way through to industry, through to everyone else. So it's going to be a really important commodity, and it's really open to the whole market and the whole world to create new novel ways to implement the assets moving forward. And it's sort of a, I look at it as I say this to Tim and Corey, but it feels like Bitcoin at 6 cents. It's you can open your laptop and create a mine a coin, where now you can sequester carbon credit and create a carbon credit from activities that you were doing today. But the resources out there, the world isn't infinite, so the amount of carbon credits that people need to use to offset their businesses, like we talk to a business, and one business's needs 29 million tons of carbon credits to be carbon neutral every year. So it's a lot, and you need lots of carbon credits to make this work.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there, and you said it towards the end. Carbon Hood has a massive asset book under management. But if you look at globally what the world needs to do to become net sort of carbon neutral, even Carbon Hood can't meet that demand today. So what we're doing here is putting the rails and infrastructure in to be able to do that. And this sort of manual processing and this sort of double handling, it already takes a long time for a crop, and probably not a crop, but a grain forest, if you like, to grow to the point of being useful from a carbon perspective or carbon capture perspective. And then you add another year of verification and getting these documents written and distributed to kind of fragmented pools of liquidity around the world. Like, you can see why we need to fix this. And so I think having a natively sort of native instrument that's cryptographically proven to not be double spent, it goes a long way to giving confidence and trust to this stuff, because ultimately they are physical assets that do exist. But when you buy these assets, you need to know that you're getting the real thing, and it's not like you can just walk down the street and check them yourself very quickly. So yeah, I agree with Yanni. The opportunity is enormous, and you're going to see some very exciting things coming out of the Carbon Hood team for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one thing that you mentioned there, Yanni, and that was the climate change side of things. And look, at the end of the day, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of tinfoil hats in the Web3 space as well. Look, I've been known to put on the tinfoil hat once or twice myself, even. So you might get a couple of eye rolls and such, when that's mentioned. But look, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is that even if climate change is a farce and you don't believe in it, the fact still remains that this imposed tax, if you will, is still for the betterment of the world as a whole is forcing us to actually replant forests and clean up the ocean and take accountability when it comes to biodiversity in these landscapes. Like, we're not necessarily focusing on monocrops to do carbon credit harvesting, because at the end of the day, as Yanni has educated me on, there is 2 layers to carbon credits, and it is more advantageous to create a more of a biodiverse ecosystem that is sequestering carbon, that now has let's just say some endangered species of leopards or something coming back into this area. Well, all of a sudden that now becomes a much more valuable carbon credit project because of the fact of its impact, the real world impact that it's achieving. So even if you roll your eyes at it, because let's be honest, I have in the past as well rolled my eyes at these sorts of things, you can't deny the fact that it's actually making the world a better place, even if it's coming out of government, greed or whatever you might kind of perceive it as. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out there as well, especially because it's the Web3 crowd that we are talking to. Sorry.
I'm going to jump in as well, really quick. Yanni actually brought up early in his introduction and description the prevalence of greenwashing. And, this happens with everything. When companies see a hot trend, a hot topic, they don't want to be left out, so they just start embracing it, promoting it, even in fluffy ways. But if you look over the last few years, tons of companies, if you look at some of the largest companies in the world, they started talking about their sustainability efforts, their commitments to net zero by whatever year. But if you look at what they've done, it's not been as substantial as it should. So they're going to need to have a way to address those commitments. And what you've all been hearing from Corey, Yanni, and Tim about the importance of this, it essentially makes carbon credits real. People can embrace that there's something there. And I think that's very important. You could think about a lot of things in Web3, similar to, say, NFTs, where people can see the value of something and get a stake in it to really validate that it exists and to see the value it holds. So I think it's important to really think about this. And let's be honest, we need to educate the market and the world on all of this. I know some of us here in this space and others live in the United States. We just saw in the course of 2 weeks drastic and devastating storms that completely caused multi-billion dollars of damage that wasn't expected, wasn't able to be planned for. And whatever you think about climate change, this really wasn't just, oh, it was just a storm and people didn't know what to do. It really was funneled by the warming of the oceans, the different pressures on each side of the storms. So there is, a sense of, if we don't address these things, we're going to be paying a bigger price, not just financially, but with people's lives. So it's really important that we understand that people and technology, they have to work together to solve things.
Really, really important point, Ian. And thank you for bringing that up. Guys, we have just spent almost an hour talking about this, and I feel like we've only barely scratched the surface. There's so much to know. We also completely buried the lead. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that that came through the audience. There is a Galaxy Quest password that we will bring up at the end. So stick around for that for sure. But let's just keep this conversation rolling. If you guys have some extra time, we might go another half an hour or so. and because I think this is really fascinating, and we're really at an interesting point in the conversation. So appreciate you guys being here and being so patient. But we started this off talking about the $70 billion that's already been tokenized and a $2 trillion pipeline. I mean, just massive numbers. I think 2 trillion. I didn't check the price of Bitcoin today, but I think that's like the total market cap of crypto. So Tim, I want to come to you. What does something like this mean for the wider blockchain market?
Yeah, look, I'll let Yanni speak specifically to the asset book, but and I've said this a few times on our other AMAs, and it's sometimes hard for people to wrap their heads around in Web3, but just gold is $18 trillion, guys. Just gold. So the gold market is almost 10 times larger than all of crypto. And so this is the scale, right? I mean, we saw BCG report saying $16 trillion of assets by 2030. There's been, various sort of consulting agencies with their own estimates, but there was one flying around this week. I can't think of the name of it right now. It's just escaped me, but they're now predicting $30 trillion by 2030. So, the amount of assets under management in TradFi represents the value of all financial markets, right? So crypto is a huge opportunity, but we've got to use it for the right things. So for us, making sure not just tokenizing the underlying assets, but the actual rights and obligations and the actual, who owns what, etc., is the most important from our perspective. So I think the opportunity is massive. I think, this space will be, it's going to prove itself anyway, but and I'm not sort of hoping for a bear market, guys, but in a bear market, you will see whose assets are really worth something or not. Because at the end of the day, these assets are underpinned by cash flows. And so we've all seen what happens to crypto assets that are just based on speculation. So hopefully we can take the best of both worlds and have the composability and the immutability and the transferability, but also create products that have cash flows and that give people confidence that they're not going to lose 90% of their value in a bear market. So I'm definitely excited about that. I think 2 trillion is an incredible number, and I'll let Yanni speak to it. I won't steal his thunder again. But yeah, we're seeing assets in all sorts of categories that are enormous, and particularly these underserved asset classes. And what I say by underserved is if you think about public equities as a very well served market. Could it be done better? Yes. Could it be cheaper? Yes. There's a lot of liquidity and it's pretty straightforward to buy a Tesla stock. But private equities isn't as well served and doesn't have the same level of liquidity. So this is why we focus on private equities. Same thing with residential rent rolls and certain funds and certain asset types. So Red Belly is really making a big difference in those underserved assets, and then we're going to circle back on the rest. So yeah, from our perspective, it's at least a $30 trillion opportunity in the next 5 to 6 years. But I'll let Yanni jump in and add his piece to that.
Yeah, let's, Yanni, if you don't mind, because I have a follow-up question for you. So I want to hold off just until Corey and Ian get a chance to speak on this. But Corey, you've been somebody that I've come to know and trust in this space. You have, such massive experience. It's great getting to know Tim and Yanni here. But you were an advisor on one of my first projects, and I always thought your perspective was really great. So just love to hear from you, like personally, or maybe from the Blubird side, just your view on the impact of this for the broader blockchain market.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose, look, at the end of the day, what we're seeing here is mass adoption. It's not the mass adoption that the crypto space was expecting, but it is mass adoption and it is happening. And I think what we're going to see is that we're going to start to see that the assets aren't just going to start to be duplicated where applicable, of course. They're not just going to be a synthetic version that's going to reside on chain, but you're going to start to see a lot of these asset classes start to reside on chain natively, like what we're starting to do with Carbonhood. So that in its essence is mass adoption, because that's the whole financial world now coming on board to this. And yes, there's going to be private chains and private networks that are going to host certain asset classes, but I feel like they're soon going to find out just how much a walled garden doesn't serve their purposes and bring them out to the broader markets when their competitors are hand over fist making higher volume and more transactions than they ever could. So by default, they're going to, for lack of a better term, FOMO into the space because their competitors were forward thinking first and they're making a lot more headway than they are. So it's just the way that technology moves, right? You can't put your head in the sand and pretend like everything's going to be okay. You can keep doing business as usual, and this is just a fad and it's going to pass. This is one of those moments like when the first motor-powered car came about and there was still horse and cart. When there was a TV to watch, but there was still radio. So this is one of those events, and it's taking it's sweet time. But if you look at how slow to adopt those technologies were versus today, we're still exponentially ahead of that curve. A lot of that's largely due to the fact that we've got a lot better global communications and such. Like there's a few other factors to play into this, but as a whole, we're still adopting this well ahead of the curve of the norm. So very, very exciting. We're going mainstream with this, which is super exciting. It's what we've all wanted, but it's not maybe how they thought it would be. And what I mean by that as well, just for those listening who might be more of from a Web 2 background as well, a lot of the mass adoption was that there would be a lot more freedoms. You would be your own bank, which you still can be in Web 3. That's not going away, at least not yet. And there was basically breaking free of a lot of the corporations and their hold over us and things like that, right? Very rebellious, very V for Vendetta style type scenario. Whereas what we're seeing for mass adoption is instead the other way, where yes, that side still exists, but you're seeing the big corporations come into it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is actually a really cool sandpit to play in. Let's move over. We're coming in here too. So look, it's going to be good for a few ways, but there is a few negative connotations that come with that as well. That can be seen as like CBCDs, which if you do a bit of digging into that allows absolute control on the financial and monetary system, which, let's be face it, can be dangerous if it's in the wrong hands, which again, let's be face it, most of the time it is in the wrong hands. So there's downsides to that sort of mass adoption. But that's where there'll always be a pushback. There'll always be a resistance. So it's up to the people to speak their mind and speak to their representatives to really push back on the things that they don't want. Hopefully they listen. Again, most of the time they don't, right? But anyway, we won't get there. We won't go into that. So that's my take on it. I think we're heading for a largely real-world asset-driven mass adoption event.
I love that. Well, you said the magic words. You said onboarding and mass adoption. And in the words of the Rolling Stones, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. And I think that this is just proving out exactly that. We've been building the tech. It's stable, and now there are massive players coming in, and that'll trickle down as opposed to trickling up, because that would be a much harder process. But Ian, sitting as chief marketing officer, you've been in tech, you've been in spaces like this for such a long time. Just from your perspective, how will the greater blockchain crypto communities that have been here and kind of had that previous vision see this as a positive, a negative, their support? Just love to get your take on how it will affect the average Web3 individual or sovereign individual that came into this space 5-10 years ago.
Well, I'm not going to take up too much time with this because I think all the feedback we just got really touches on the core. But what I will say is, the big benefit of Web3 from a visionary perspective is that it gives individuals the capability to participate in the marketplace, to control their data, to have more, elements as part of their strategy. But we have to remember that Web 2, participants and the big players in financial services, they still matter because they validate the market, they hold assets, they, embrace and, move trillions of dollars back and forth. And I remember seeing a statistic that said over 40% of institutional investors plan to invest in tokenized assets in the next 5 years. So if you consider all the individuals who have been participating and are interested in doing so, and now 40% of institutional investors doing it as well, this isn't fluff, it's not just hype, it's substance. And by all of these participants coming into it, that's how you move things forward. You know, it you climb a step, one step at a time to get to the top of the staircase. Well, now, if you have institutional investors, individual investors, organizations, and governments working together, you climb up that staircase a little quicker. So hopefully it will do what we all anticipate and bring substance to the future.
That's perfect, man. I love that. And it seems like just from this discussion alone, the people that need to have a firm grasp on this. Yanni, I appreciate your patience. I know I jumped to those guys first. And I definitely, as you sought out to find Red Belly Network, and had an idea to put this on chain. I'm sure you have a take on how it helps the wider blockchain market. But as you answer that, I'd also love to know, what does it mean for the broader carbon offsetting sector as well. So if you could kind of combine those two into one thought, I think love to have you take it home here.
Yeah, sure. So the vision basically is to have the registry as the single source of truth open to players globally. So not just Carbon Hood's assets, banks and institutions, certifiers to use our space, which will leak into other markets, other exchanges globally to create a single, I suppose, represented, transparent point to grow the carbon industry. And that's really the vision for, I suppose, Carbon Hood and the registry which we're building with Corey and Tim. And my pitches to the banks at the moment really revolves around Red Belly and the Carbon Hood asset, because Red Belly is what I've seen so far, just a credible and institutional focused blockchain, which I think no one's quite got the grasp of where the institutional players need to play in, and that's probably why there is going to be a sort of a mass dump of real world assets coming onto chain, because there's going to be more and more solutions which are, I suppose, corporate friendly and allows people to play in the space where they need to play in the space, because the cost of transacting and the speed of transacting is going to be really critical moving into the future.
I love it. I love it. So we've now talked about the lead. We're all excited for what it means for blockchain, how it helps the carbon offsetting sector. Corey, you kind of started to touch on this in terms of institutional involvement, but can you elaborate a little bit more? Or Tim or Yanni, do you want to jump in on the growing interest from large companies and institutions that are globally in carbon credits and the tokenization?
I'll let Yanni take this one, I think.
Yeah, so I'd say every major corporation has asset pools of carbon credits at the moment. Not huge amounts, but 10, 20 million tons. And everyone struggles to sell them because of they can't sell them to someone without having the person retire them on the sale point. And that's where the registry will open up avenues for trade and leverage moving forward and futures, etc. So I think it's critical. It needs to move into a space like this. Everything that Web3 has built in the past is, it's paved the way to what's possible, and it's allowed, likes of Carbonhood and other companies to just build upon and add their, I suppose, corporate corporate nuances to the table really, and that's it's a really exciting space. Like me and Tim were having a chat today about wallets and other solutions, because there's little things in the financial markets that are just missing, and but the option for everyone in the Web3 space now is to just have that crossover, that mix between that Web3 and allowing the Web2 world to come on chain and transact in a similar way to how they transact on the other side, but more efficiently and quicker and in a more transparent way. And I think transparency is going to be the key to the success of a lot of businesses moving forward.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Look, that's spot on. And what Yanni was alluding to is partners like Fireblocks. We need to make sure that these institutions can access these assets on our network in a secure way. The idea of a multi-billion-dollar asset manager playing with MetaMask is horrifying. But I think ultimately people will get to that stage of comfort. But for now, we need to know that there isn't a single employee in a large bank that has control of all the assets with their private key. So we're now having to think about backwards compatibility, thinking about how does a company with thousands of employees access these assets with confidence. And I think Yanni's quite far down that road, thinking about what his customers and buyers need. So yeah, I echo those sentiments for sure.
Corey, want to jump in here, or we can move on to our final point?
I am tapped out on this one. I think that was handled fantastically.
Awesome. We'll always want to keep it open for you. So we've talked a ton about the tech, how it works, why it's important, but let's just clarify before we wrap. How carbon credits, they're restricted, they're manual processes. It's an inherently liquid asset. Like, how does it become an inherently liquid asset, and how does tokenization enhance that liquidity? So Yanni, I'll jump to you, and then Tim, and then we'll do the giveaway, guys. Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, cool. So tokenization just makes it okay. So how Carbonhood does business. So we'll go into an industry and we'll identify who the major players are. We will sell them assets. They need to offset their emissions. So we work scope 1, 2, and then work into scope 3. Build out projects across the globe for them in areas of businesses that they're operating in. So let's say they're operating in Asia, we'll do a biochar project with them there. We'll do some reforestation with them somewhere else. We'll do some manufacturing or some flare gas projects where we're scrubbing the columns of smoke coming off the top and reducing the amount of pollution going into the air, and sell them back to them. So in order to do all of that, we need to have a central place where we can buy, sell, and trade really efficiently, and that's why we need tokenization, because at the moment we run across 15 registries, which requires us to make phone calls and talk to people, talk to project managers, and it's a really slow process. And unfortunately, it doesn't allow the global liquidity to happen when it needs to happen. It takes months. So this is the main shortcomings of where the carbon market is today, and why we need to sort of make a change to move to the future, because all of these goals and all of the targets that are sort of set in place, in one sense, yes, you can say and roll your eyes, as Corey said, but they're imposed on us, just like like tax. So if we can learn to play in that space better and utilize it to our advantages, there's so many opportunities there. And Web3 is, I believe, at the moment, the best solution.
Well, I believe so too, and I think all of our audience does. But it's
Yeah.
fantastic to know you guys are out there building this. As we're here day and night, you guys have been way ahead of the curve the whole time. Tim, just your thoughts from the Red Belly perspective on the enhancement of the liquidity for these carbon assets and any other asset that may fall into a similar class or opportunity in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, liquidity is pretty much everything. I talked about underserved assets before. It's very difficult to accurately price an asset unless there's a market price. It doesn't have to be traded 24/7, but if the market hasn't determined the value of something, it's very hard to kind of stand next to that and kind of argue its value. Just because Corey bought it from me doesn't necessarily mean it's worth what Corey thinks it is. So let the market decide, as they say. So, these assets have decent price discovery now, but one of the things I loved about sort of Carbon Hood's vision is this sort of global price discovery. There's very deep fragmentation in the industry. Now these assets natively live on chain. What we can do is create Web3 exchanges in each region that wants access to a various asset type. So, if you think about even an AMM of swapping, an asset into another token, let's call it US dollars, is interesting, but we actually see a future where there's Web3 order books. And so you'll have the same way you've got price discovery for Bitcoin and ETH and other assets, you're going to see price discovery for these assets. And so because they'll be dealing directly with the registry on chain, there's about as low a cost as you can possibly imagine. And obviously Red Belly's got some huge advantages with fixed gas costs, but getting price discovery across the world in real time will really put confidence in what these assets are worth. And obviously the provenance from a cryptographic standpoint, from an issuance side, is the other side of that confidence. So to trace it all the way from the project all the way to the registry and from the registry to the tokenized assets, which are being traded in real time. I mean, that's the future, right? We also talked about, there's a massive appetite. It's growing every day for these assets to offset, the impact to the environment, and therefore people are going to have supply and demand. Really, people are going to need to compete to buy these assets, particularly the high quality premium ones. And this is going to obviously come with speculation and most likely price appreciation. So once we get these assets to a point where they're liquid and they're globally traded, we can then do amazing things with, DeFi tooling, lending and borrowing, collateral, insurance, red capital. You heard the guys talk about some of that earlier. So this is the same for every asset type that has value. And so Red Belly's got that kind of vision, of course, and we ultimately see that, turning into a liquid market for these structured products that are made up of these types of assets. But for us, I think carbon has a really important place because of just the impact to the planet. So yeah, I think liquidity will be the key benefit for a lot of this stuff, other than trust and distribution. And so that's exciting. The other thing I would say, historically, the average investor, the mum and dad, they're not really looking to buy a carbon credit. I mean, unless they want to speculate on it. This is very much an instrument for large corporates and governments to sort of, offset their carbon impact and tax. But, I can see, every investor starting to look at that as either a store of value or as something they can potentially, speculate on. So even if they can't buy a particular asset, what we're seeing is people creating indexes above those assets. So you can create an asset issuer can create a basket of a bunch of different credits and a bunch of different jurisdictions, and the retail investor can get exposure to either the upside or the downside of that asset through a unit, almost like how you would do a REIT on the stock exchange, and you get exposure to commercial real estate. So this is what composability is, guys. So I'm super excited by that. So I think this sort of wholesale retail challenge that we're always going to keep seeing will be, significantly improved in terms of access for retail with things like indexes and tokenization. And that we can do that in a compliant way to make sure the asset issuer has the asset and they're not just promising they do. And that's where we see a massive opportunity. So super bullish on that part for sure.
That's great. Thank you for all that sharing. One of the things I love about spaces like this, and kind of this platform we have in Web3, where we do have access to the founders and to the builders, is that communities can ask questions. And I know we're right up against it. We've talked almost 90 minutes, so appreciate all the patience of the audience and our panel for being here this full time. But there was one question from the Red Belly channel, and Tim, I just want to see if you can run through it for them. How many users can we expect to use Red Belly's blockchain to trade carbon credits? And do you have something in mind regarding the daily volume it would be? So if you want to touch on that, then we'll give away the code and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, so at the moment, Red Belly testnet has 141,000 KYC users. So there's a combination of users that have KYC directly to the chain, and there's a combination of users that have been onboarded through asset issuers. So, getting these assets on chain means that asset issuers that, for instance, Uneven Carbon Hood can start to offer these structured products to their user base. So we're really creating a channel not just for Web3 people to deal directly with the asset on chain through a marketplace or some sort of order book, but we can start to take these assets back into Web 2 using distribution methods. So Hutley's one of our other partners. They've got 300,000 KYC users on their platform, and already, they're offering services to them at point of sale. So we can really start to package up carbon to Web 2, and I know Yanni's touched on that as well in terms of some of those credits. So that's super exciting. We ultimately see partners like Fireblocks as an important channel into institutional digital asset teams. So, someone like Goldman Sachs would want distribution via a Fireblocks integration. A landlord or a sort of a property investor might want access via a Hutley platform. Carbon Hood has governments and institutional buyers all over the world that would want access through the marketplace. So I can absolutely see massive interest in pretty much every one of those channels, but I think it's worth just sort of echoing once again that an index or a basket that gets exposure to an underlying asset natively on Red Belly is where I'm really thinking the immediate use case is for retail investors. So unless you're Deutsche Bank and you've got a couple of $100 million to buy some credits from Carbon Hood, what you might want to do is get exposure to a basket of that as with a much smaller check size. So yeah, I think that we've built some really good organic demand on testnet, and you're going to see that translate. But I think early in mainnet, you'll see some big transactions, but maybe not a lot of them, because just the sort of $200-300 million transaction is huge. But as we start to build these spot markets and people start to trade these in real time, this is where you're going to see, trades happening all day and all night. But that's going to take a bit of time to build that liquidity. But that's for sure where we're focused.
Thank you. And thank you for answering community questions. Guys, if you have more questions or they didn't get answered, jump in these guys' Discords. Follow them. Follow the main accounts, Carbon Hood, Red Belly. Follow Corey. Follow Ian. Definitely follow Tim and Yanni for everything that they're bringing to the space. And, what a powerful concept this is. We always look for onboarding. Here it is, right before our eyes. It's just not how we expected it. But hopefully you have a better understanding of what it does and why it's so important. So with that, always appreciate our community and the support. The Galaxy password, if you're ready, the Galaxy password is carbon assets. Assets plural, all lowercase letters. Carbon assets. So go ahead and throw that into the Galaxy Quest. Should be open for a little bit, but make sure you get it done soon. Typically, I like to just open the stage up for final comments from everyone. I know we're really up against it. So maybe just 30 seconds. We'll go straight to you, Ian, and then we'll just run through the panel real quick and say our goodbyes.
Sure. Well, as everyone knows, I usually like to think of a relevant quote to highlight what we've been talking about. So the one that comes to mind is from the iconic computer scientist Alan Kay. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. And while exploring, experimenting, discovering, and inventing are crucial, so is creating solutions that integrate and reinforce others in mutually beneficial ways. That's why I think this collaboration between Bluebird, Red Belly Network, and Carbon Hood is so significant.
Thank you, Ian. I love the way you put it in perspective. Tim, I'm coming to you. Final thoughts before we wrap?
Yeah, so we've got a few things, well, more than a few things happening in the next few weeks. So the first thing I want everybody to be aware of is we've upgraded our identity platform. So we'll be supporting driver's licenses and national IDs in over 190 jurisdictions. So the current testnet has only supported passports, so that's about to change. So we'll be putting a bunch of comms out around that to welcome, the 80,000 or so people on Twitter that want to do these Galaxy quests that have been kind of blocked for some time. So that's super exciting, and we're going to make some announcements quite soon around the mainnet launch and also TGE. So we're definitely on the final stretch here, guys. Very exciting. It's not going to be 2025. We can all take a deep breath. So yeah, we're gonna have a lot of fun in the next few weeks. So yeah, that's us.
Tim, thank you so much. What great perspective. Really excited to learn more about Red Belly Network today and your participation with Carbon Hood and Bluebird. Yanni, go ahead and wrap us up. Tell us what we need to know, anything with the project or that you want to leave us with.
Yeah, I think I'd like to unpack this over the next few weeks and share with the community what I can't really speak about too much today, but is really close in the works and will be really exciting for the carbon space, but also for Web3, I think, and possible new movements globally.
That's awesome. And there's so much to talk about. We'll definitely have to have you guys back on soon in the Birdhouse. Corey, bring it home, my man.
Well, if that wasn't a cliffhanger from Yanni, I don't know what is. It was fantastic. And Ian, mate, if you were to write a book titled Quotes for Daily Life, I would buy that in an instant. They are just, I mean, I don't know, you must have read like the entire library of books that exists globally for the amount of quotes that you come up with. It's simply inspiring and amazing. So thank you for sharing those with us. Almost every interaction we have, I believe it is. It's just it's astounding. It really is. I'm waiting for the day where you say, you know what, I don't actually have a quote, but I haven't had that day come yet. So it's it's one of those things, you know.
Well, if that happens, then I'll just have to say something and call it my own quote.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, look, I'd just like to wish everyone a happy weekend. And look, it was an amazing space today that we've had. Not the usual cup of tea for a lot of folk, I can imagine, but hopefully it brings some insight and education to this side of the the space as well. So on that note, looking forward to our next space. Nothing really to tease about on my side, although there is a few things going on. I don't want to, there's no beans to spill at this point. Looking forward to next week's space.
Awesome, Corey. Thank you guys so much. Yanni, Carbon Hood, thank you for being here. Tim, Red Belly, appreciate you. Ian, Corey, Bluebird, you guys are fantastic. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to host these spaces. Again, the password is Carbon Assets. That will be open all day, so get your Galaxy Quest in. Thank you guys for being here. Wouldn't be able to do this without you. And definitely stay tuned. There's stuff brewing, as Corey said. And so we're going to have to adjust some schedules to make sure. So keep those notifications on for the Bluebird account of when the next Birdhouse will come up. But until that point, this is Mike flying out from the Birdhouse. Thanks, guys.